go ahead, Tom, if you want to just introduce yourself and say a couple of whatever you want. Go for it.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this Power Block webinar that Tom is going to go through, cover some VROPS discussions. We understand a lot of our customers are going through somewhat of a digital transformation, and your IT infrastructure is important to you because you're supporting workloads and applications and whatnot. And VMware, through a solution such as vRops, can really help optimize your infrastructure, which is really optimizing your applications, which essentially is optimizing your business. So a couple quick points. vRealize Operations has been around for close to a decade. It represents over $1 billion business within VMware. We have been a market leader for 3+ years. And at the end of this session for Q&A, if you have any questions on how vRealize Operations is sold, please let us know. So basically, with growth and scale, VMware has a self-driving vision that Tom's going to talk about today. It automates, simplifies, and brings this vision to your IT infrastructure. So thank you again. And if you want to go deeper after this call, let us know. We can schedule a one-on-one with you and your teams. And I'll hand it back off to Tom.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And you can relax your voice now. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. For anyone that hasn't joined in the past who doesn't know me, my name is Tom Szabo. I'm a solutions architect at VMware. I cover our cloud management platform, which is roughly synonymous with the vRealize suite. You just heard from Tom Fryer, one of my counterparts. And I also have Alonzo Treomora on the line as well, one of my counterparts. He's going to help with answering Q&A and keep me in line if I go off track or off time or anything along those lines. So as we go through this, if you have any particular questions, drop them in the Q&A. Alonzo will be monitoring it. We'll try to answer anything that comes up. If we don't get to a specific question, we will follow up via email and make sure any questions you have are answered. The purpose of today, what I've been doing over the past almost 2 years now, give or take, due to COVID time, is doing what we call Power Block sessions, where it's a webinar where we pick a specific, either feature or capability of, specifically vRealize Operations in this case, and dig in a little bit deeper to it. So it's meant to be a technical session. It would actually help if I change to our agenda. So today, what we're going to talk about is really digging into, using vRealize Operations, but aligning it with, either business constructs or business outcomes. So changing the way you're looking at your infrastructure and reporting, essentially. So, the typical format of our Power Blocks is to, what I'm going to do is run through a couple of slides. Promise not to put anybody to sleep this morning with death by PowerPoint, just to talk about and review some of the concepts that we're going to be looking at and that we can leverage inside of vRealize Operations to do some of that, business-oriented reporting, if you will. So we're going to go through some of the different, components of vRops that you can leverage. And then what we're going to do is jump into one of my environments and actually, show you how to do some of this. So look at creating custom groups, creating super metrics, creating a custom dashboard. And I know some of this might not make any sense at all yet, but hopefully it will as we run through. Then I like to follow up with some different resources to dig in deeper to get started in your own environments or learn more. And then obviously saving some time at the end for Q&A. But like I said earlier, if you have any questions, just drop them in Q&A and Alonzo will do his best to answer them. All right, so moving forward here. So, for the most part, hopefully most of the folks on the call are at least somewhat familiar with vRealize Operations, some of the capabilities and the potential outcomes that it delivers, right? One of my personal favorites, what I speak to my customers a lot about, is this particular outcome up here, improving operational efficiency. And that's a big part of what we're going to be looking at today. So, Tom already hit on this a little bit. vRops, the high level, it helps organizations monitor, analyze their virtual infrastructure. One second, I'm going to turn my video off so it's not recording it. And yes, Gary, I just saw your question. I will definitely email this as a follow-up, the deck and the recording as well. So, vRops at a high level, it's helping organizations monitor, analyze their virtual infrastructure, provide, performance information, capacity planning. It's great at mapping hierarchical infrastructure relationships out of the box, but there is a need for more, in-depth business-oriented reporting based around logical business constructs, such as services, applications, departments, groups, business units, however logically your business is structured, being able to align how you're looking at your infrastructure and your virtual machines, your applications, the services that you're providing back to the business. So, obviously, in today's world, our businesses are living and dying by their services and applications, right? So, and as infrastructure is expanding, it's not necessarily always, an application doesn't necessarily live inside of a vSphere cluster, right? It might be spread across multiple clusters, multiple data centers. It might even be, partially on-prem, partially in the cloud. So it's starting to become trickier to keep track of everything. And even if you have visibility into your infrastructure, it helps if you could provide focus into what's important. Working with customers a lot with vRealize operations, I get a lot of, how do we get started? Where do we begin? And what we're going to look at today is how you can start to focus on what's important, control the scope of what you're looking at, and make it as easy as possible to get good information out of, all these metrics and events and properties and everything that we're correlating, out of your infrastructure and have it make sense. So before I go any further, I have to give a large shout out to Peter Timble, another VMware employee. So he wrote a technical white paper called Aligning vRealize Operations with Business Outcomes quite a while ago. This is over 5 years old at this point, where some of the concepts in this white paper are, getting slightly dated around, how to do particular things. The actual concepts themselves are still highly relevant. So, and Alonzo, if you could maybe put the link in the chat, that would be helpful if you get a chance. I highly recommend that anybody that is even, hey, if you're running vRealize operations, if what we're talking about today, if it's even vaguely of interest, definitely go out, download this white paper and give it a read. It's only about 40 pages. It's not a 1,000-page tome of documentation or anything along those lines. It's really a good investment of time. And I had to give a shout out to Peter here because this is, the inspiration for this webinar. And also, when I was first introduced to vRealize operations, it was this paper that made a lot of concepts click and made me realize, some of the value that you can get out of, some of the maybe not obvious at the surface level concepts of vRealize operations. So, digging in here, anybody that's ever logged into vCenter and managed a vSphere environment, this type of, diagram should be fairly familiar, right? vCenter at the top, virtual data centers, and then different clusters, hosts, virtual machines. Maybe you're using some vSphere folders to group different resources. Maybe you're doing a couple of different things. I certainly have customers that are, maybe they'll break clusters by, application levels or Windows and Linux, or hey, this is my database cluster. So there is definitely some good structure in this type of diagram, right? But it's definitely more of an IT level, approach to understanding where, virtual machines live and their dependencies and relationships throughout the actual infrastructure itself. So, frequently, service, application, business unit stakeholders, people that actually own, an application or a service, they'll come to IT and ask for reporting around, hey, their workload's performance, utilization, and consumption as a whole, not necessarily, how is vSphere cluster A running, but how is my application running, or how is my service running? So there may be questions such as, what's the VM growth for a particular service, or how many CPUs have been allocated to all the VMs in a particular application, and how much of that allocated CPU power are those VMs actually using? Maybe, how much storage space are all the VMs from that a particular department owns that they're consuming, or why are there, what are the poorly performing VMs in a particular application and why? So, vRops from an out-of-the-box reporting perspective is really good at, understanding this hierarchical model, being able to, understand where virtual machines live and how they're related to the infrastructure that they're running on top of. But it starts to fail when you get some of those questions that I was just rattling off, where where you've got VMs that make up a particular application that are spread across, maybe multiple hosts, multiple clusters, multiple data centers. It starts to be, or even managed by separate vCenter instances. So one of the things that you can do with vRops is it allows for the organization of virtual machines into logical groupings that represent the business structure needed to easily answer those questions. So you can take advantage of vRops features such as custom groups, super metrics, to provide the necessary logic that can be built in to quantify and answer those business related questions that are being asked. So these constructs can abstract and decouple performance, utilization, and capacity data from the underlying infrastructure, and massage it into a way where it's more relevant to whatever you're actually looking at from a business level perspective. So basically, to sum that up and make, just simplify it is, hey, let's look at your infrastructure, but rather than looking at individual VMs, let's just group things based on, are they an application? Is it a service? Is it a function? Who owns it? So this diagram is basically just showing an example of, we'll just call it service XYZ, which is made up of 3 different virtual machines, and you can see they're spread across hosts and clusters. So you can group different types of resources together, hosts and VMs, clusters and VMs, but typically you see virtual machine constructs being grouped together simply because that makes the most sense as far as what's actually providing an application. So the examples I'm going to use as we move through here today are going to be based on virtual machine groups. So how do we actually do this? Let's dig into some of the capabilities that are in vRops that allow you to start to do this grouping. So number one is custom groups. So essentially what you can do, and we're going to look at this inside of my environment in a couple of minutes, where you can create groupings of any type of resource that you want. So in this, just looking at this as an example, this is called regex example. We can create a dynamic group. We'll look at that in a minute. Control what policy is associated with it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then we can look for specific membership criteria. So, we can start to group based on name, based on vSphere tag, vSphere folder, a particular metric. You can force objects to always be included in a group. So the sky is the limit, and you're actually limited basically by your imagination at that point, especially when you get into, looking at regular expressions to do grouping, where now you can use vRops and all the data that it's collected from your environment to start to segment out and create custom groups that say, all right, hey, these are all the VMs that belong to this particular service. All right, another component is supermetrics. So what supermetrics are, hopefully most people are aware of, the different types of metrics and properties that are available at an individual object level. Supermetrics take them to another level. Essentially, I like to think of them almost as having Excel formulas inside of vRealize operations where you can manipulate data as you see fit. So supermetrics are derived metrics that can be used to measure performance, utilization, consumption, cost by different business units and applications, or in the case that we're looking at, the custom groups into which the different virtual machines are placed. So this is a quick example of what we're talking about here. So in this case, looking over here, we've got a custom group. There are 3 virtual machines in it. Sorry for my terrible scribble. Where basically what we're doing is we're just creating a function. So we just want to do a count of all of the virtual machines that are within that custom group. So we have the concept of depth, which is something I don't see many other offerings out there that can do things like this, where now we can specify and say, all right, hey, we've got this custom group here, but we actually want to pull together metrics maybe from the virtual machines that make it up. So we can create this formula that says, all right, we're going to apply it to the custom group, but what we really want to do is look below, potentially here with the depth, and say, all right, just count how many VMs are in this group. This is a fairly basic example, but as you can imagine, you can get really, the sky's the limit as far as the way you can combine different metrics. We support different units. So again, depending on the type of metric, maybe it's in, kilobytes or megabytes per second, or, from a storage perspective, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, time, right? So different types of metrics that are supported, and you can combine them. And we're going to walk through this in my demo as well, where you can actually create one, and I'll show you how to assign it to specific objects and show how everything works. And if anyone, like I said, if anybody has a question, just drop it into the Q&A, please. So these are just some other examples I wanted to throw out of, some super metrics where, the first one up here, basically it would create a metric that's looking for, health that's greater than 78. Maybe we want to look for VMs with, more than 4 vCPUs and more than 64 gigs of memory. Looking at VMs where, the guest operating system from VM tools is different than what's coming from vCenter, or looking for, a specific resource that contains, a particular name. So, there's quite a bit of different ways that you can approach supermetrics, lots of information out there. The white paper I referenced has different examples that you could leverage as a starting point, right? Most people I talk to don't necessarily know algebraic VROPS formulas off the top of their head. So there are ways to pull in data and look at reference material and see how you can leverage it. All right, so policies, just touching on this really quickly, because this is one of the ways that you actually enable supermetrics, and we'll look at this in my environment. So, everyone that's running vRops has at least one default policy running. So what policies do, they provide the ability to enable specific metrics, enable alerts, basically control, configure how you want to provide specific, monitoring for various types of workloads. So you can leverage different policies based on, maybe different environments. If you've got a production environment, a test environment, a development environment, maybe you've got different SLAs. So by having the different policies, that will enable an organization to have distinctive sets of alerts and thresholds across those environments, and potentially use different capacity management models as well, depending on exactly how you're tracking your workloads. So, in essence, policies provide, a number of different ways to fine tune almost all aspects of vRops, which allows you to, makes it flexible and allows you to adopt it for your particular situation. So another component, which we'll take a look at, is dashboard creation, right? If you started to group VMs by application or service, however it makes sense, starting to look at super metrics or even just consume metrics and properties that are associated to those virtual machines, a great way to start to pull it together is to create a dashboard, a custom dashboard that focuses on exactly what's important to you, right? Some of the ideals behind a good custom dashboard is that it's a one-stop spot, if you will, to take a quick look, understand what's going on about a particular construct inside of your infrastructure, and put the information that's important right there on the dashboard. So that way you don't necessarily have to be clicking into other places to get more details. Make it as easy as possible to consume. So we are going to walk through creating a sample dashboard. If you haven't looked at vRealize operations in a while, it's gotten significantly easier to build out a dashboard. We've got out-of-the-box widgets. It's an easy drag and drop design where you can control exactly how you want to visualize and the types of data that you want to pull in. And another component that's somewhat newer, and there are ways to share dashboards internally in vRops, but another feature is that once you create a dashboard, you can actually create a URL that, if somebody can get to that IP address or the fully qualified domain name of the URL, they would have access to the dashboard without needing to log into vRealize operations, without needing to, so you don't have to worry about RBAC and controlling what exactly they can see. Again, presenting a dashboard that shows, hey, this is all that's really important to me, and nothing else, and make it as, just streamline the approach to sharing information around your organization. All right, I'm gonna pop out of my slideshow and actually jump into my demo, right? Because I promised not to put everybody to sleep with PowerPoint, but I thought some of those concepts were important. I will share the deck, just to have for reference. So what you see on my screen here to start is an example of a custom dashboard, my focus dashboard. So this is an example of, kind of the results of everything that we just talked about, how it can actually come together. So just to explain what we're looking at a little bit. So on the left-hand side here, I have an object picker, so a group list, and these are some different custom groups inside of my environment. They're associated with some development VMs, some production VMs, a little test environment that I'm playing around with, and my vRealize lab itself. So these are all hosted environments, if you will, inside of my lab, with my vRealize lab possibly being the most important, simply because I wouldn't be able to do this demo today if I didn't have this up and running. So based on what I choose here, you can see it's going to update and give me information about that particular custom group. So we will look at how I create these custom groups, but just as like I was saying earlier, it can be essentially any criteria. These are all using vSphere tags, for example. And then from there, what we're looking at, and this is just examples of ways to show data, either looking at metric charts or a scoreboard. What we have on the top here, this is group information. So these are some of those super metrics that I was talking about, where I'm either doing, the aggregate, let me know how many VMs make up this particular group. Let's go to a bigger one. And now I can double click that and look and see, okay, historically, where am I? Didn't mean to do that. Let's do this. I want to actually change the date. Maybe I wanted to look at, over the last 90 days, what's my development environment look like? So you can see, I actually typically run more VMs in that group than I'm currently running. I'm down to 10. So we have that historical information. So, when you get that question of, how many virtual machines make up a particular application, potentially the total cost. So something like, with vRealize operations, we have cost drivers built in. So these are all aggregate metrics of every virtual machine that make up this group. So it could be an example like this count, Or maybe we're just looking into the group and saying, hey, give me the highest VM CPU contention. So that's something else you could do with the metric, is just look for the max value out of all the virtual machines in that group. So from there, I can also feed this group list in, where now I can see, all right, these are the VMs in that particular group. And if I needed to, number one, I can verify, hey, I am collecting data. This is looking good. I've got some, VROPS is communicating properly. I can see information. And then I could come along and look at, metrics or properties that are relevant to that particular virtual machine itself. So, looking at things like memory contention, or, my scoreboard here. So whatever your KPIs are, your key performance indicators, whatever's important to you, you can present on this dashboard. It's easy to maximize if you want to look a little bit further, just want to focus on something in particular. If I want to look at, my throughput on this particular virtual machine over time, I could do something like this. So an easy way where, whether you're using, custom groups to look at specific environments, applications, business units, however you're logically divided, like I was saying, you can, quickly get the information that's important to you. And these are just some examples where it's easy to consume and read. So examples here, just some properties of the VM, relationships. Here's my development group. These are all the VMs that are inside of it. And then we can start to see other information about, services that are running, data store that they're living on, and so on from there. All right, so this is a good example of a custom dashboard, but how do we actually get here would be a good idea. So first, let's take a look at custom groups, since I was talking them up. So underneath your environment tab inside of vRealize operations, and by the way, if this looks slightly different for anyone that's running vRealize operations today, this is 8.6.3 in, I think it was 8.6. Now I'm going to confuse myself. We slightly changed the layout, where some of the options that were formerly across the toolbar up here are now on the left-hand side, just changing some of the grouping and making it easier to find different components. So under environment and custom groups, this is where we can work with our custom groups. So the first thing I want to call out is group types. So what a group type is, there are some that are out of the box, and you can see how they're defined by adapter or user. And this is where you can create your own. So what's important about group types is that this is how you can bind super metrics to custom groups, and also how you can organize your groups. So like I have, for example, this hosted group type, and that's where my groups, if we go back to my custom groups here, and we will pick on production here. That was one of my groups that were listed in my object picker. If we edit him, we can see, all right, name of my group, production virtual machines. There's my group type. So I can control grouping, and it's also, when we get to super metrics, it's how I can apply super metrics to those specific groups. The policy that's associated with this group. So again, being able to use the policy to fine tune exactly what you're collecting or potentially alerting on. By checking this box, I'm creating, this is now a dynamic group. And then what I'm doing is down here is I'm setting, and you can see custom group membership is updated every 20 minutes. So by checking that box, every 20 minutes, vRealize operations is going to look and say, hey, are there any objects that match the criteria that I'm looking for here? And if so, let's put them into this group. So in this case, you can see I'm looking for virtual machines that have a particular vSphere tag. You can preview it, see what shows up. This looks right. You can always force objects to be in the group if you wanted to, or force anything to exclude out of that group. And we can also assign a custom property inside of vRealize operations to that group as well. So we'll add one here just to give you an idea of how this works. So I'm going to create a really basic use case, group of Windows VMs. So I'm just going to look for every, assign a policy to it. I'm going to look for all the virtual machines in my environment. Properties. And we're going to say guest OS from vCenter. Actually, we'll say guest OS from VM tools. I like that. Is, well, actually, let's do guest family, make it a little more broad, is, and then we'll say it's a Windows guest. And we can click preview. And those are all the Windows servers in this particular lab. So as simple as that. And then if you wanted to add additional criteria, maybe we want to add, same thing, properties, and let's say, maybe we wanted to look to see if virtual machine, the VM tools is running. Give me that list, and hopefully it'll be the same. In this case, it would be a surprise if I didn't have VM tools running on those virtual machines. So you can control and really fine tune exactly what's going to show up in a group based on whatever criteria you want to leverage. So we're going to just go with give me all my Windows guests in my environment. Hit OK. And now you'll see we have a Windows group that's starting to be created. It typically takes about 5 to 10 minutes for badges to start to populate. But what's happening now is I have an object inside of vRealize operations that are associated with all of those Windows virtual machines. And you can see it is actually starting to show up here. We can see all the different VMs that make up, that are basically running Windows inside of my environment. So from there, on number one, you have an easy way to just view, all right, here's my Windows, here are my Windows machines. Obviously in a larger environment, probably wouldn't want to just group by this. You're going to get a lot, by operating system family, you're going to get an awful lot of virtual machines. However, that might be useful, right? I have a customer that, they leverage that to divide between Windows and Linux, control their alerts based on the operating system and the metrics that are important to them. And they also just they have, specific views, and that's another key piece. Anybody that's using views, which are basically different ways to look at data. So if we look at vSphere, actually, just filter for, let's do this. And we look at virtual machine inventory. Now we have a very easy report that shows data on all of those Windows virtual machines, powered on state, just information about what makes up those VMs, IP addresses, hardware versions, what version of Windows, desk tools. And this is just an out of the box view, but you can also create your own views. And now, because of how we group things, now you're dealing with a subset of your environment, where this isn't necessarily a business construct, this is more infrastructure, but hopefully you're getting an idea behind why grouping makes sense, where you can control the focus of what you're actually looking at. So if we go back to custom groups here, and let's say we look at where did I put it? Oh, why don't I search? There's my vRealize lab group, which is more important. This is, for me, how I do my demos, right? So it's really important for me to understand, what do I have going on inside of, my lab, the environment that I'm running. So it's an easy way to correlate and see, essentially what these are all VMs that make up the vRealize suite, different components of it, whether it's my vRops, my vRealize automation, salt stack components. Now I can group them all and look and understand what's going on. So, step one is really, get organized, start to create and leverage these custom groups based on, however your business is logically divided. So again, I was using Windows as an example, but maybe it's, a particular web server or website, I shouldn't say web server, website that's made up of multiple VMs. Maybe it's all HR servers, all finance servers, however you want to group things. You could see, different examples here. I've got my Active Directory servers, my SQL servers. So this is more infrastructure, but the same idea applies depending on, whether you want to look at applications or more just of an IT type of view. All right, so from there, all right, we've got our custom groups that we looked at. Now, maybe we want to do a super metric. So I've got some different examples inside of my environment here. We're going to create one just to show you that it's not necessarily that difficult and give you an idea of how it works. So if we click add, and we're just going to create a name for it. So we're going to do a count of virtual machines. And so we're going to say next. And now we're going to create a formula. So you can see all the different functions that are available. Combine, average, min, max, sum, count. Some of these I'm not even off the top of my head. I couldn't tell you exactly what mathematical functions some of those do. I'm going to drop in a basic formula that I have. So basically we're just saying, this was in the presentation, count, give me all of the VMs that are in a particular group based on where we're going to assign this. So we can see we have our formula, go to a preview, and let's just say I look for my vRealize lab group. There it is. And we can see I've got 7 VMs making up that group. So it appears to be working. So next step is, where do we actually want to assign this super metric to? So this is kind of important because you don't necessarily want to assign a super metric to every object in an organization, because now VRops is going to be doing calculations for things that aren't important. So in this case, if you remember, I had that group type of hosted. So that's my container, and it doesn't mean Docker container. It means just a container of objects. So by applying it to that group type of hosted, this super metric will automatically be applied to any groups that are inside of that group type, which makes life really easy as far as automating and being able to continue to create this type of content without needing to kind of reinvent the wheel every single time. And then the next option is, where do we actually want to enable it? So, again, maybe I don't want to enable it at the default policy here, because it doesn't need to apply to every object in my environment. I have this hosted policy as well that I'm going to assign it to right here. And once I click finish, it's going to create the super metric and it's going to activate it. And it'll look something like, where's my count? Yeah, my number of VMs right here. Another good example is this number of oversized VMs. So, hey, give me a count of any VM that has a metric that says, it's oversized. So basically vRealize operations has looked at it and said, hey, there's potential here for right sizing. This VM has, there's VMs that have more resources allocated to them than they're actually using. All right, so we've got some custom groups and we've got some of these custom metrics. Now, how do we actually start to leverage them and pull it back? So number one, if we go to visualize in dashboards, you can use it in a custom dashboard like we walked through here. There are also out of the box dashboards. So if we look at, for example, showback, so a common use case of vRealize operations is to be able to derive per VM costs and use them as either showback or chargeback to different business units. So if we pick on my, so these are some of my custom groups. There's my development group that we were looking at. And now, and this is an out of the box dashboard, by the way, for vRealize operations. Now I've got, I've got that group, the VMs that are inside of it. You can see them down here. And we can see what our projected cost is, month to date cost, cost distribution and any potential savings, which is typically tied to, either idle VMs, old snapshots, powered off VMs, whatever your policy is around capacity management, you could see some of those potential savings. So this is an example of an out-of-the-box dashboard that starts to leverage those custom groups, but maybe you want to do something custom like I did here. So what you can do is you can create your own. So, just to show that again, because I just realized I clicked that really quickly. Under dashboards, you'll have a create button. So we can click create. Maybe click create. I probably shouldn't have clicked too many times. There we go. Create what's called vRealize webinar. So, create a good name for your dashboard. And what I typically do recommend is, maybe have a consistent naming convention, whether it's the initials of your company, in this case, PS Tom Zabo, just so you can differentiate from out-of-the-box dashboards and ones that you've created yourself. So once you have a name, now we've got different types of widgets that we can use to create informational viewpoints, if you will, into the different metrics that you have available. So maybe I want to start with a scoreboard, for example. So let's say I want to look at that vRealize lab environment that I have. So I can drag over a scoreboard. So it's going to look like this. We can edit it. And we'll say vRealize scoreboard. I like to always refresh content. So SelfProvider. So when you look in and edit a widget, there's going to be a lot of different information that's presented to you. A couple of things to think about. SelfProvider just means, hey, this widget is pulling in data directly, and it's not interacting with another widget to pull in data. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. So in this case, this is going to be a SelfProvider. You can set the visual themes. I like pastel. It makes it look nice. What do you want to show? Sparkline, just to see some of that historical trending. And then because this is a SelfProvider, we actually have to select, all right, what are we going to look at? What do we want from an input perspective? So in this case, I'm going to find my vRealize lab, which is my key application, if you will, here. And from an input transformation, you have the ability to say, hey, do I want to look? I'm looking at this custom group, vRealize lab. Do I want to look at it at itself? Do I want to look at children of that group? So those would be the virtual machines themselves. In this case, we want to look at the its own construct. And then what kind of data do we want to look at? Here's my vRealize lab. Oh, let's do hosted. And we'll see here are the super metrics that are available for those groups. So maybe I want to see total number of VMs, disk IOPS, maybe total cost, count of virtual machines. There's those number of oversized VMs. I'm not expecting much there. So we can choose the metrics that we want to show. If we want to edit the box labels, we can, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. Let's say number of VMs. If we wanted to filter it further, we can as well, but we're not going to. And then we're going to click save. And now you can start to see the metrics that are coming in. And I don't know, I think I have a broken super metric that I chose here, which is why I'm coming up with a question mark. And now we're starting to build out a scoreboard based on the subset of the environment, the application that I'm running, my vRealize application here. Maybe I want to look at relationships. So we can drag up this object relationship here. and we'll call this group info. If I could type group info, fresh content. I'm going to turn it into a self-provider, and maybe I want to look down into the VMs, into the group itself, see what it actually looks like. Search for my vRealize lab again, because this is the object that we're focused on. Click save. And now you could start to see, and there's a lot going on here, so I would probably want to make this widget a little bigger. We can see in, all right, so here's my application group. These are the VMs that make it up. And now we have information around, the data stores that are, these VMs are residing on, some of the different services that are running, because I'm using service discovery. Do a quick plug for my previous webinar. The last power block I did was on service discovery. So, it is out on my YouTube if you want to check to see how you could do things like this to discover what's actually running. Maybe we want to look at, the top alerts that are associated with this object now. So again, hey, vRealize is my key application. We can edit this. Make him a self-provider as well. Same thing, I'm focusing on that custom group. Save. And now we can see all of the alerts that are associated with that group that are being picked up by, the children of that group, those virtual machines that make up my vRealize lab group. Do one other example here. So let's say I wanted to do a metric chart. I'll show you how interactions work. If we edit this, say refresh content, and now we're not going to make this a service provider. Keep it on self. Output data, again, what types of metrics are important? So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to look for virtual machine metrics. And maybe we want to look at, CPU contention. Just going to pick a couple of examples. Demands. Look at memory contention. Let's pick. And usage. You click save. So now, because this isn't a self-provider, it doesn't have any information yet. But what you can do is the show interactions button. We can say, we can have this widget interact with the metric chart. So now if I click on, let's say, VRA primary, now it's going to show me the metrics that are associated with that particular VM. So the input is actually coming from this group info widget up here and showing the metrics that are down available here. And I guess the last example I'll give, I know we're starting to run out of time, is if we drag on an object list, for example, and maybe we want to see some of those services that are running. Same thing, we're going to focus on our vRealize lab. Look at children. Adapter type, and what we're looking for is service discovery adapter. And now I've got a list of all the services that are running inside of this vRealize lab application grouping that I've created. So I know this is kind of quick and dirty. I just wanted to show, some of the different ways that you can manipulate data to create a dashboard. And obviously I would probably want to clean up the formatting and just the way the layout is probably the better way to describe this. But that's how you can rather quickly start to get to the point where you have more of a focused dashboard that's focusing on, the key applications or services that are important in your environment. And from there, now you can take this dashboard, you could use it yourself. This is more high level looking across the environment, but maybe the one that we had just created, you can click this little icon up here, create a URL. So if I sent out this vrops.tomszabo.com URL, if anybody could get to the fully qualified domain name, you would be presented with this dashboard. It would be fully interactive without needing to log into vRealize operations, without really even needing to know how to use it. It's just the information that's relevant to you, to your application, to the VMs that are, that are under your purview, under your control. All right, so with that, let me jump back into my PowerPoint. Just want to show a couple of different things. So again, I will send this deck out after the call, along with the recording for your reference. I actually got to change this URL because I realized it's pointing to the service discovery documentation, but I'll change it to some documentation around supermetrics and custom grouping. Another great resource is our cloud management blog. Again, I seem to have really goofed up my top two URLs here. I will change this. I don't know why I have what's new vRealize Network Insight integration in here. It is on the blog, but I'll set it to the primary URL itself. It's where we send out up-to-date information on new releases, different way to do things. Talking about concepts like we were talking about today in the webinar. Next URL is, and I can't recommend this enough, to read that technical paper, to talk more, to dig deeper into some of the concepts we covered today. We have an ops guide. If you haven't checked this out yet, I highly recommend it, which it talks about vRealize operations and also some other concepts around just operating a VMware environment. Highly recommend that. And then, any of the recordings that I do for these power blocks, I do put them on YouTube. You're welcome to check them out, learn more about different aspects of vRealize operations. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and take a look in the Q&A and see what kind of questions we have.
Yeah, hey Tom, there was one specific question as well around using PowerShell and commandlets as part of a way of basically enriching the policies with added metrics. Just wanted to ask there if that's something that is supported as part of creating super metrics and your general policies.
Gotcha. So not necessarily, so you can use, inside of vRealize operations itself, you could definitely call, if you wanted to, just real quickly, like let's say I wanted to pick on an individual VM. So you could probably guess the function of this VM by its name. If you wanted to execute a script against it, and this is using service discovery and VM tools. So if I just threw something in here, you do need a username and password. So I could technically upload a PowerShell script and run it. So that's not quite the, not really what the question was, but this is one way to, just going to throw in a basic command line. Just doing a net stat. If I got my username and password right here, I should get a corresponding response here. So you can't necessarily use PowerShell inside of the policy itself, but you can use it inside of vRealize operations. There may be a way to use, I have to think about that a little bit more, Gary. That's a good question. There may be a way to take some of what you're querying from, let's say, PowerShell or PowerCLI and push it into VRops somehow, but I have to think about that a little bit. But that's a good question. The service discovery, yes, that is, Gary, happy to either dig deeper into that with you at some point, or I'll make sure you have a copy of my previous webinar.
Yeah, another question that came in was, are these features available in SaaS or only on-prem?
They're available in both. One of the only differences between the SaaS platform and on-prem is if we go back to my dashboard here, this little share button is only an on-prem feature today. It is sought after for vRealize Cloud, but because of there's some security implications on how someone would access a URL, over the internet without necessarily getting access. So we're probably going to do something through the cloud proxy, but today this is an on-prem function. It doesn't mean that you can't share a dashboard with somebody in vRealize Cloud as well. It's a little bit of a different mechanism. Anything else out there, Alonzo?
Just one more around what edition of vRealize is needed for Supermetrics.
Oh, thank you. Yep, so this would be a vRealize Operations Advanced or Greater feature for something like Supermetrics. All right, it looks like all of them. Thank you all for joining my webinar this morning, our webinar this morning, I should say. Hope it was helpful. Again, just trying to give you some ideas, some food for thought on different approaches to how you can leverage vRealize operations in your environment. I will send out the deck and a copy of the recording. If anybody has any questions, feel free to hit me up. Always happy to dig into your particular use cases and what you're trying to solve for or accomplish. So I hope everyone has a good day, and thanks again for joining. Have a good one.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Alonzo. Great job.